All right, welcome back, everybody. Today is another advanced topics for TLC conversation, and we're going to be talking about statistics and testing. We probably won't dive real deep into the math behind it, but our goal here is to better understand and better be able to explain the statistics that is the underpinning of our experimentation, so that when business users are asking us questions, we can give more accurate responses and help them understand how we use statistics in testing to make decisions. So welcome, and let me introduce your panel. So today we have Ellie with us for the first time. Welcome, Ellie. She is currently Assistant Professor of Marketing at Drexel University and a Senior Fellow at Wharton, so she's kind of a smart cookie. She grew up professionally doing marketing research in General Motors, and she has developed courses in digital marketing and marketing experiments. And I forgot the name of the one course we talked about, but it was like experimentation for businesses or business users or something. It's really, really relevant. It's exciting. I'm so excited that there's a university teaching students the stuff that we do every day, because that's going to help us, what do they say, rising waters raise all boats or whatever. Anyway, she's doing cool stuff, so ask her about that later. She's also an author of R for Marketing Research and Analytics. So welcome, Ellie.
Thank you.
And then back for a three-peat, the wonderful Matt Gershoff has agreed to join us again. I think we'll just make him a regular. He's such a smart guy and answers such great questions in ways that, you know, some of us can understand. We really appreciate having you. He is the co-founder and CEO of Conductrix. He has 2 masters in AI and resource economics, because one is just never enough. He spent his 90s working in database marketing, you know, which is basically the data science we all started with. And he is a data scientist in the true sense of the word. So welcome back, Matt. And last, we have the newly hired at Search Discovery, Tim Wilson. Yay! Welcome, Tim, to the team. He is our new Senior Director of Analytics at Search Discovery. He's, as most of you probably already know, the co-host of the Digital Analytics Power Hour, and he has recently spent, you know, a little bit of time in an optimization agency startup where he first realized how hard this world would be. And if you don't know about the hashtag Matt Gershoff, that's because of Tim. So, but you know, Tim, I didn't put in here, and I almost did hashtag Tim Wilson's hair, because I think it's only fair if you're going to call out Matt Gershoff that we add Tim Wilson's locks. Yes, yes.
Talk about an experiment that's gone horribly awry.
So welcome, guys. I really appreciate you and taking the time to tackle this topic and help the rest of us better understand it and be able to speak to it. So thanks, guys. Let's kick the conversation off on, I actually want to take a step back. So when we created our notes and we went through and we kind of talked about what we wanted to talk about, I thought, Matt, you made a really good point about what's the first thing the first order or second order, I can't remember the language you used, but it's not about what kind of tool you should use, what kind of test. Should it be a one-tailed or a two-tailed, or should you use Anova, or is this even an MBT problem? You started with the first order. Can you kind of explain to the group what you meant by that and how you begin to approach this problem?
Sure. Although I think you threw me a softball, but I think I'm going to whiff it because I forgot what I was saying. But I think the point was, and this is Ellie actually also. This was I think she might have been the first person to sort of mention this in our chat, which is really about you know, really we're trying to make a decision, and the idea is to think through first, you know, what are sort of the costs and benefits of making, you know, sort of making this decision. So depending upon the use case, it may very well be that it doesn't really matter, right? And in a way, there's this saying, which is, you know, the really hard, you know, really certain decisions that are really hard to figure out what's best often are the ones that make the least difference because they're so close to one another. And so I think what we were saying was, one, the first order of business is to assess, what are the costs and sort of what are the benefits, sort of what's the risk around the decision that you're trying to make.
Ellie, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, well, that's the starting point, right? To think about, in the context of your specific problem, what is the decision you're making? What are your options? Then think of the experiment as something that informs that decision and gives you the ability to make that decision a little bit better. And that can even help you figure out that maybe you shouldn't be doing an experiment at all. So let me give an example. So you're doing the sample size planning and you're deep in that formula, and you realize that the number of run days is going to be 3 months. And the reason for that is that there's very low traffic in this corner of the website. Back up. What is the decision we're trying to make? We're trying to decide, what should the image be on this corner of the website that gets very low traffic. We could probably just let the hippo decide that one. It doesn't matter. If we do it better, we get $50 more. So that's not even worth my time as an analyst to be thinking about. And so if you back up and really frame testing as something you're doing to give you information that will help you make a decision better in the future, it's going to keep you out of a lot of rabbit holes.
Well, let's go there, because I stole your tweet the other day because you had made such a great comment. I immediately tweeted it before you could even say, hey, wait, I'm going to tweet that. So let's talk about that for a second, because what you just said is really important, because I think we fail as an industry to think about testing as in the fact that it has a cost associated with it. And so if we think of testing as something that has a cost, frankly, it's probably, Avinash coming out in the beginning and says, the internet allows us to fail faster, we should test everything. And so we're all like, yeah, let's go test everything. But there is a cost associated with it. And there's a reason we test. And the reason we test is for information to make better decisions. So can you share with the group our conversation that led to our tweet?
I'm going to have the same problem as Matt. I can't remember. I don't even remember what I tweeted. That was like 3 days ago.
So much has happened. I've slept twice.
Remind me what the tweet was.
Okay, let me pull it up. This was the one where we were talking about our goal isn't to have perfect answers. We're not trying to find the truth. We're trying to make better decisions.
Yeah. So, but I think, we had started our discussion with like, oh, should you do a one-tailed or a two-tailed test? And I was reacting to that and saying, that those are what I'd call a second order problem. So they're details and the traditional testing statistics are set up so that one of the things we wanted to bring out in this conversation was if you think about this as a decision problem, there's kind of 2 mistakes you can make. You can pick, you can say that there is a difference between the things you're testing when there isn't, or you could say that there is not a difference when there really is a difference. And a lot of the statistics that we do are set up to make sure that we don't say there is a difference when there is not a difference. Now, let's do a really specific case. Suppose we're looking at what color should the call to action button be. And our test says that there is not a difference, or it says there is a difference when there's not a difference. So we get a significant result. It says that the red and the blue is different, but there's not actually a difference. So if I make that mistake, how much do I lose? Nothing. There's no difference. Use the red one, use the blue one. It doesn't matter. And so the statistics that we usually use for A/B testing are really, this significance thing is about not making the mistake of saying that there is a difference when there is not a difference. And it comes from medicine, where they really don't want to be monkeying around with drugs that don't do better than no drugs. But in our case, if it's red versus blue, who cares, right? That's not actually the worst mistake. The worst mistake is saying there's not a difference between the red and blue when there really is a difference. And you pick the wrong one, and then you're leaving money on the table. So that was kind of where we were headed with that.
Right. Absolutely. And we're in the business of making decisions.
Is that asymmetric loss, or did I just use the wrong term?
No, you used exactly the right term, Tim. That is asymmetric loss.
Okay.
And the classic example of asymmetric loss is, what time should you arrive at the airport? A little too early is not as bad as a little too late.
Oh, that's good. That's a good description. I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
In a lot of our cases, there's kind of one decision that's not as bad as the other. If making one mistake is not as bad as the reverse mistake.
Not as impactful. Well, let's talk about significance versus significance. So one of the things that we all know, we kind of went back and forth in our conversations, and we know is an issue with the industry is, what should your confidence level be, and how strict should you be? And we kind of went back and forth with it. And I found the conversation interesting, and actually engaged in additional conversation after we had chatted. And I think there is a correlation between the sophistication or maturity of a testing program in an organization and where they land on that confidence requirement. And interestingly, there seems to be a group of people who feel very, very passionately that if you have the strict statistical confidence and you find a statistically significant result, you go for it no matter what. And then there's another group who says, yeah, but just because it's significant doesn't mean that there's a significant business impact. And I wonder if you guys could talk about that a little bit. Tim, have you had examples where, you have a 99% confidence in this 1% lift, but that 1% lift is not going to impact or this 0.5% lift is not going to impact the business, or maybe the KPI selected really wasn't financially impactful?
I'm not coming up with a specific.
I have, Tim, if you're struggling. So
okay,
I'll leave you on the hook for a bit if you want.
Save me. Go for it.
Yeah. So, and I think this is related. I mean, obviously, this is related to what we were just talking about before, which is actually there's sort of like these two layers. There's sort of the business assessment of the sort of the costs and benefits and an expectation. And then there's the separate question, which is the statistical question, which is there actually, we're trying to make some sort of assessment. There's these competing alternatives, whether or not it makes a difference with respect to whatever our objective is, right? And so you kind of need both. You kind of have to overlay sort of the business costs and benefits over the statistical question. But the first thing to do really is the business assessment. And so we had a case, actually, it was a partner, and they were doing headline testing for a client, and they were using our software, and they wanted to use our Bandit software. And so they were doing a pilot, and we were sort of optimizing the headlines, and they had some nice conversion, some lift. It was it doesn't really matter. Say like 50% lift, right? It could be 25%, doesn't really matter. And I asked them, and they were trying to make the business case, and I said, well, have you guys assessed what the value of a click is? Because it was clicks onto the news articles, which was the objective. And they were like, no, actually we haven't. I said, well, you need to assess that first. And actually, you probably should have done that at the beginning, but let's think about it. What might it be worth? And they were like, well, it's probably worth a cent or two, a couple of cents. And you could just do a quick calculation that, and this is, I think, really important to do, like a worst case. So even if we were going to need to have a lift on average of 400%, so we're going to have to do 4 times in order for the payoff to make sense at a 1 cent value for the marginal click. And so I was like, it doesn't matter what our software does or what you offer them. There's no way, based upon changing a headline, you're ever going to get a 4x increase. And so that's like, I think, a good way to go into, before you, as you're prioritizing experiments, whether it's like a bandit style test or if it's going to just be a regular hypothesis test, is kind of say, well, what is the lower bound, which is in part what you're doing when you're calculating your sample size, which is why I think it is one of the nice attributes of doing it the frequentist way, is that you actually have to kind of articulate as part of the process what is sort of the minimum lift, and that minimum lift should be guided by what's the minimum amount that makes any sense for you to take action on, and anything below that which is not of value to you. And
so when I took Matt, when I took DOE back in engineering school, my professor's words still echo in my head. His name was Bob Storer, and he always said you should align practical significance with statistical significance when you're planning your sample size.
That's right. And in fact, it's statistical significance unfolds from the practical significance. And you shouldn't, it shouldn't be the other way around, or you shouldn't think of them separately. It's start with what is the business trying to do, and you need to, and this happens to us, we see this fairly frequently, unfortunately, usually with newer clients. And, you know, they'll ask me for help with a power assessment or the sample size, how much they need. And I'll ask these questions, and it's surprising how often folks like, oh, I don't really know what the value is of the objective in some sort of dollar value or euro value or whatnot. And you know, it's very difficult to sort of plan these things out if you don't at least have some sort of rough idea or heuristic of what the value is.
I think some of this, where we kind of got lost, I blame the physicians. So the physicians were trying to sort of come up with very rigorous scientific standards for how to decide whether a drug works or a medicine works. And they decided somewhat arbitrarily that we should have 95% confidence for anything. But even that doesn't make sense. So if I'm trying to decide whether we should use mastectomy to treat breast cancer or not, then yeah, maybe I actually want 99% confidence because that's an expensive surgery, causes a lot of trauma to the patient. Why would I definitely do not want to do that if that does not work.
Or more.
On the other hand, if I'm testing whether or not acupuncture makes you feel better when you have a cold, there's kind of low
there's no risk.
I'll use the acupuncture with 70% confidence because, like, what's the risk, right?
Right.
You know.
Right. And that gets back to when we were talking about how, when we think about what our standards are going to be for a optimization program, you know, what confidence level should we use? A lot of organizations go in and they make that decision up front. But instead of starting with the data, if we start, like you said, Matt, with the business, and we say, you know, what do we know about our customers? What do we know about the cost of our program, of our testing? What kind of outcomes would we need to see to make the juice worth the squeeze, if you will, to really get the ROI from our program? If we start there, then we know how to fine tune. And we talked about using risk as an input to that decision making.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the alpha, at least in sort of a classical test, like your confidence level and your power are kind of trading off the risks of which mistake you're going to make, which was what Ellie was referring to earlier on, and what Tim was mentioning, sort of, you know, sort of assessing whether the sort of like the type 1 or type 2, those are two sort of blunt errors that you can make. I would argue, I think, just as a sort of a general rule, which is, you know, if making a change is going to incur some sort of cost, right? So you have an existing system that seems to be working pretty well, and the organization is counting on it and behaving at a certain minimum performance. Then you're probably closer to the medical case in a way of, you know, the Hippocratic oath of doing no harm, and so you probably want to have a higher, you know, sort of control you want to have a lower potential error rate with that. Like you want to make sure you don't do damage to the system, and any potential damage is going to way offset any possible gain. And in the inverse, it's like if you have a problem that's brand new, you don't really have a real control. The control is just a straw person. Then it doesn't really matter. And in fact, it may not even really matter so much if you do a hypothesis test or not. You might just like be able to eyeball the data because so what? You're going to collect a certain amount of data, and then whichever one looks the best is probably the one you should just pick if you're indifferent in terms of you don't have any prior information on why one would be better. So I think just you kind of want to be rigid in certain cases, and in other cases, you don't want to sweat it so much, I guess, which is also what Ellie was kind of referencing at the very beginning of just depending upon the use cases, is my take.
But that's kind of, I mean, that's anathema to kind of how we've been conditioned to think, right? Which is there is a binary, black and white, it's significant or not. And every test, it needs to clear that hurdle or it doesn't, which then kind of routes it down the path of, well, what's the right way to test for significance when I'm looking at revenue per visit versus when I'm looking at conversion rate? And it seems like to me, that's just kind of like the desire of the marketer. I know I complained 10 years ago. I'm like, I can't get a straight answer out of somebody who's no statistics. They won't just tell me if it's better or not. They're always giving me this uncertainty range. And I want to go back and smack myself in the face, for being frustrated about that. But it's like we have conditioned the entire marketing industry to look for a binary without one thinking about the asymmetric nature of the problem, B, thinking about the practical significance versus statistical significance, and C, recognizing that it's not a binary thing ever.
Tim, it's not just the marketers though. So I reference physicians, but also some of you may have followed in the social science literature. There's a big problem now where people have, so they've had this bright line rule, this strict rule that you cannot publish a psychology paper unless the confidence is, the p-value is 0.05, the confidence is 95% or more. And what that has driven is a lot of, maybe you've heard about this thing called p-hacking, where if the analyst has any subjective decisions to make at all, like, what's our KPI going to be, whatever, they actually look through the data post hoc and just find one, fish for one that's p.05, and then they can publish it. And so people like these bright line rules. It's really unfortunate because the world isn't, sometimes things are fuzzy. I have a question for the audience. I've been wondering, what is the best way to report statistical uncertainty to business people? How do you like to do that? And there, when I teach classes, there's kind of two ways to approach it. There's the hypothesis testing framework with the p-value, and you say this either is or is not significant. Or the other option is to say, I think the difference between the A treatment and the B treatment is, 0.1 increase in conversion rate, but the confidence range for that is minus 0.3 to plus 0.2 or something like that. So do people who are on the call like to do confidence intervals or prefer to report whether something's significant or not? Do you like that binary thing, or can my real question, I'm blathering a little bit, but do you find that the people you communicate with could understand a range?
They don't want a range. They want an exact number. They want to know how much money it's going to make.
Yeah.
Or they want to know what the difference is going to be. But then you can couch it and say that M will continue a back test and make sure that it holds up.
So what do you do when you're reporting them at Intel, Dylan? You report confidence intervals or significance?
No, we tried that for a year. That was a mess.
Really?
We told them, we tell them what the impact is going to be, and then we then continue with the back test and verify that the impact came through in the business.
That it was at least as high as you reported it?
That it was in the range, and hopefully as high as we reported it. But we have different factors across the tax seasons.
What happens if it isn't? Like what
Then
difference does it make in a way? And I don't mean that to be confrontational, but I'm just trying to understand what do you do with that information?
Oh, well, think about it in terms of it's an annual cycle, right? And so we were to roll out a test and we wanted to know what the impact was for the remainder of that annual cycle. We would then look and see what do we think the benefit could be in the next cycle for having that experience out there for that period of time. And so we couch it from that perspective.
But so it seems to me though, there's I don't know if this is correct or not, but maybe there's two use cases. One is we're trying to make a decision, right? And you guys are trying to decide what type of feature to put into the testing, the tax software. But once that decision has been made, it's done. And then there's the second objective, which isn't really a testing, I don't think, is more of a forecasting.
Monetizing.
Yeah,
correct.
But also
You're absolutely right.
What the value is going to be long term.
There's 2 points. You're right, Matt. And then but the first point is, was it the right decision and did it play out? And you're doing that for the rest of the tax season. So you're doing did we make the right decision component? And then we look at that at the end of it, or we looked at it at the end of it and determined whether or not that was the right decision, right? And so by continuing the test, we're able to verify that we made the right decision. And so that's the piece that I think is. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm going to press you on this a little bit. What does the company do with it? So what if you make the wrong decision? But let's say it doesn't pan out. What course of action is taken other than just to penalize people? Like, I'm trying to think of how does the organization iteratively improve? Like, what's the value of that information with respect to future improvement?
Do we continue to allocate resources against that particular feature or experience, or do we move on to a different experience?
For the next release?
Yes.
Is that
yes.
next year?
Yeah.
But wouldn't you be doing a new test? So just so I understand, you have a discrete process, which you guys have like a certain week period. Then the software is in lockdown, and then it doesn't come up into play until the next year. Is that right?
I mean, there's still changes that happen outside of that tax season. And so the question I think becomes, do you allocate resources in the next quarter to continue to build upon that feature, or do you move on to some other feature that might have more business impact?
Okay.
I in my experience, for whatever reason, because you see it all the time in when they're reporting polls in the media, they say plus or minus.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody gets that, but you cannot go to a business and say the lift is 5% plus or minus 3. They don't do well with it. Dylan's right. I have yet to have be involved in a program where the business users would accept that as an answer. And it's because of exactly what Dylan's saying. They're trying to calculate impact. And so they need a single number, a single input. And I've tried to give them, I've tried to calculate impact for the bottom and the top of the confidence and say, okay, so now we've got this interval and, we think you're going to have a financial impact of, I don't know, 10,000 to 25,000 for this month or whatever it is. And that's not okay. And so it becomes, it's back to the question of, is the juice worth the squeeze? Just like we're trying to decide how strict do we need to be in our calculations. And I think it goes to how you're going to use the data. If you're just going to use the data to make decisions, if you don't need to calculate impact and revenue and put it in your P&L, I think you can make better decisions more quickly with less data and lower confidence. And I say better decisions only in that, I mean, less messy, less confusion, less time. If we think about, Ellie, using your example of having your students pay for information before they make the decision, and then showing them how they pay, the more they pay, it starts to, yes, they get more data, but that isn't always enough data to make a better decision. It's kind of like that in testing, but if you're going to calculate a financial impact of your program or of a specific experiment, and then you're going to take that and you're going to forecast it, and you need to be accurate because it's going to go into your budget and for next year.
I guess
it becomes more important.
You're fooling yourself, right?
Yeah.
you're saying it's accurate when it's not accurate. Like, so I guess I would rather take, like you were suggesting, if I had a confidence interval, then I can, and I'm trying to blow out some kind of forecast or an ROI calculation or something, I do that for the bottom and the top, and I get my best case and my worst case. And sometimes those are all so low that you're like, this is not, I'm not going to think about this anymore. It's not worth it. Sometimes they're so high that it's clear that you're going to do something. And sometimes they're in the middle. And when they're, and that's, you know, that's to me, what statisticians should be doing, or what statistics should be doing for us, is helping us understand uncertainty. You know, the difference between a statistician and a hack is that a statistician cares about uncertainty. It's not that we know which test to run. It's that we deeply in our hearts care about the uncertainty and want to communicate that uncertainty to other people.
Interesting.
Despite the fact that humans hate uncertainty. I understand that all people hate uncertainty, but I've made it my life's work to communicate uncertainty to businesses.
That it's messy and there isn't a single answer.
I didn't say we don't calculate the confidence interval. I said we don't communicate it.
Yeah,
You made a distinction.
I am with
But you made a distinction. But you made a distinction there that the statistician cares about communicating the uncertainty, and so I totally believe in that, and I think that understanding that uncertainty component of any experiment that we make a decision on is very, very important. But there's also a practicality of, am I going to be better off by deploying resources against making this change, and keeping this change, and continuing to evolve this change, or do I actually want to go and do something else? And so that uncertainty piece will play a role in that, but that's the job of the recommendation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Dylan, but are you hinting at that in some cases you want to hide the uncertainty because you want the business to make a decision?
No, absolutely not. That's not the case. That is not the case. But
I've done that. I have absolutely done that at General Motors.
But if you
this
evaluate
decision is
your
not worth
test,
thinking about anymore, so I'm not going to tell you it's uncertain. Just do it.
interesting.
So I will say that I have displayed confidence intervals as error bars and kind of selectively, especially when I feel like the tests are ridiculous, you know, the bright orange or the subtle orange. And it's like, I can't stop the test from running. So I think that it would make a whole lot of sense for there to be a step back and a broader discussion about testing, and can't win that battle. And in that case, I have used here's our little bar chart, and then here are the confidence interval. You know, here's just these little error bars. I don't even necessarily label what they are, but it works for that. With guys, we're not really thinking about testing. We're not thinking big enough about it. We're not thinking about it impacting the business. We're thinking about it of kind of playing at the margins. And most of those tests are going to come out where it's kind of like, Ellie, your example of red or blue, whichever one you want. Like it doesn't matter. But that runs counter to the, like, well, why are you running these tests then if you're not making a decision? It's like, well, because we're not really running the right tests. Well,
actually, Tim, what you just said is where we want them to go. We want them to drive decision making. And I think what the industry is, well, a large portion of the industry is doing, they're not worried about, is it better? Simple. Is this treatment or this experience or this, targeting, is it better? So yes or no? They're worried about how much better. They're trying to calculate lift. And when you try to calculate that lift, you need higher standards. If you take that out and you just say, is it better? Can I make a decision? Go, no, go. I think we could do more. We could answer more questions and make more decisions faster.
Yeah, but I think it's just different types of problems. So like the problem where we really just care about rank order, and not even really rank order, we just care about finding the max, right? Mm-hmm. What's the one that does the best? And we care less about, maybe by how much or the uncertainty around each one of the estimates. That begins to slide towards a bandit type of problem, right? Where we're really just trying to search over the option space and just make a selection. And so it is kind of a continuum, and it's really going to be the art of the analyst to decide, what type of problem and what types of information do I want to get out of this. But I think there's two things. There's one, it's assessing the types of problems and the technologies you want to deploy. And then I don't know what you guys think. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like in certain organizations, the testing is almost like maybe a purification ritual, as opposed to a way of data collection and purchasing information or investment in information. And so it gets me concerned when I hear you saying, people just want the right answer, or it's like it went through this test process, so an obvious answer should come out. Makes me think that maybe the organization does not fully understand the nature of experimentation and hypothesis testing. And I don't know if you can get to what you're trying to get to, Kelly, until the organization understands the role of experimentation, which is not as a cleansing ritual procedure.
You're talking about like risk mitigation or decision validation.
I feel like or just risk from like a political standpoint, which is like we have these decisions and it becomes like a bureaucratic function, a bureaucracy where we're trying to like put the blame into the process as opposed to into the responsibility of individuals to actually take action.
Yeah.
Which actually, so that does, maybe it starts to be a little off topic, but back to Matt, your original point about calculating the value of what your test, your optimization metric is. I mean, I did have a client once where they said we should be doing testing, and it was just because, a vendor that included testing in their suite was saying, hey, you have these other products, you should buy this. And they said, well, we're looking into this. And I was like, well, let's figure out what hypotheses before we buy it, it's going to be really cheap to let's just figure out the first 5 tests we do, whether they're the actual 5. We just need to come up with 5 good tests. And they couldn't do it because they hadn't really done the work to figure out where the value was. I was trying to struggle with that. Like, what is the purpose of your site? So we kind of steered them off you're not ready to do testing, stop listening to the vendor. And they agreed and smiled and nodded. And then 6 months later, they went and bought a testing
tool. Yeah.
So I think there's that piece too, that by the time you get to, do we have significance? It's possible there have already been these sequence of decisions of, well, we know we should be doing testing just because in absolute generic terms, testing is a good thing. And
people are telling us that.
Right. And now you're just sliding down that slope. And now I think you're to the point of blaming the process of saying, why do we have uncertainty? Why am I not able to quantify a lift? And you're 7 steps down a path that probably shouldn't have gone down.
So we have to look at reframing the conversation in the front end. Ellie earlier was blaming physicians for these high standards and even in the social sciences, the folks doing the research requiring the 0.05 p-value. I think there's also an element, and this is obviously not directed at you, Matt, but there's an element of testing vendors who are out there saying, there's no uncertainty, number one, and number two, you can get 2x, 3x, 10x, whatever lifts, and that gets the leadership and the hippos thinking on the lift instead of this is a decision-making tool, just like user testing or analysis or market research. All of those should be situations where you are spending money or time and resources to get information to make a better decision. This is just another tool to help you make a better decision. It's not and shouldn't be just about,
it's not a magic box. And I mean, they certainly don't hear that from me.
I know, that's why I said I'm not talking to you.
Right, which is probably why no one is using us on this call. Because I'll tell you that actually, that's, to a certain degree, you have the ecosystem that you deserve. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality, is that that's what people want to hear. And, it's not very compelling when I go in and I say, this is hard, and our software does not absolve you from doing the hard work. The hard work still stays in the organization, right? They do the analysis, they have the editorial. Dylan is doing work, even though he has, a testing platform. They're still doing the hard work, and that's something that's difficult, I think, for a lot of clients, where they expect the magic box.
Because that's what the big brands are selling them.
That's what they want to hear.
So having kind of gone down sort of, I think, the textbook ass backwards way personally, and then getting Matt Gershoff repeatedly for years, a lot of the vendors are out there saying, we'll do the hard math for you. We'll just give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We'll represent uncertainty in some way or not. To me, part of what's helped me think more clearly about the uncertainty is to try to dive in and understand one-tailed versus two-tailed, what a t-test is. Like it does seem like there's a little bit of a circular learning. I don't really know what the right entry point is. Like diving into the specifics of understanding distributions and confidence intervals and confidence levels has then led me back to, I think, the higher order thinking about approaching it. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on, like, there is value in trying to understand that stuff, recognizing that that's not really the answer. That's just an entry point to asking the right questions.
Well, I think it is valuable if if the reason why, I'm going to get worked up, like if the reason why you're using the software is to do hypothesis testing, right? Like that's like you want it's not just between selecting A and B. I mean, look, you can just run experiments without doing any hypothesis testing. And as I were talking about before, you sort of have this symmetric payoff structure, and you don't have any prior belief that one is better. It's just you're picking between new competing alternatives each time. You don't even really, I bet you as a heuristic, if you just pick whatever one was best after collecting X amount of data, that probably wouldn't do too badly. The reason why you're doing hypothesis testing is to put it either through some severe testing or to assess some sort of probability that it's better, right? The whole point of it is to assess the uncertainty. That's why you're doing this part of the extra step. And if you can't be bothered, seriously, if you can't even be bothered to understand how the stuff works, right, then don't bother. Like, it's either important or it isn't important. And this is one of the things that I don't quite understand from certain organizations. It's like, wow.
Anybody who wants to private message me and know how to get Matt really riled up,
yeah, I mean,
I know where those buttons are.
Let me ask you this.
The other issue,
Dylan knows what he's doing, and they're successful, but because they understand what's going on. It's not a mystery to them because they've invested in it. And part of investing in it is having at least someone over there who has some understanding of what's going on. That's my take. And if you can't be bothered, it's not going to be worth it to you.
The other issue that happens that is that the vendors are all trying to claim that they have the right way, that there's many ways of analyzing it and they have the right way. And the truth of the matter is there are many ways to look at these things. For instance, you can pick any confidence level you want. There's many choices there. And earlier on the phone, we had when we were talking before this call, we had a short discussion about two-tailed versus one-tailed, and I said, well, just change your confidence level. Like, that's it. If you actually bother to work through the math, you'll see the details of that. Actually, it turns out to be the same both ways, whether if you could just half your significance level and you get a two-tailed versus a one-tailed test. But I think the vendors are often like saying, we know exactly the right way in all circumstances to set up the math, when the answer is actually there's many ways to set up the math. They should be matched to the specifics of the problem. And so everybody's wanting a simple answer when there's not a simple answer, I guess.
or the flip side is they say, we support multiple approaches, pick whichever one you want, which is fine, I think, if you have that underlying understanding, but it gets interpreted as, well, let me fish around until I find the one that gives
me confidence.
right?
Whoa,
So,
that gives me the answer that the hippo wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. If once it becomes co-opted by the structure, it doesn't really matter. It's just rhetoric from that point. But Tim, how like, if you think about it, if you don't know anything, like any tool or device or apparatus or whatever, if you don't know how to use it, I don't know how you expect to get returns off of it. So, I mean, the reason why like we provide various approaches is because it's going to be depending upon the use case, and the client will have different use cases. So there isn't like there isn't one approach. It's really depending upon the type of question that you're asking, and it really behooves the organization to understand and know what questions to ask. I mean, there's no getting around that.
but I think I agree. I'm personally having found it be really hard to get to that deeper level of understanding, and I'm fairly determined to do it. And there are kind of two structures. The people on this call who are analysts, many of who understand this stuff way better than I do, and then there's our stakeholders. And I don't know the answer. We can say, all day long that the organization needs to have this deeper, more nuanced understanding, but somewhere between they need to have it and we need to, send them through a year-long program. I'm struggling to figure out, how do we close that gap? How do we articulate it in a way that drives kind of the right mindset? And I don't know the answer.
I don't think there is one.
Well, I mean, I'll say I don't know the answer. I will say of late, I have been trying to experiment with trying to walk through and say, take a simple data set and let's walk through. And we think that it's perfect. And Matt's seen me talk about like a Oneway Anova, trying to provide some intuition behind it. So I think there's some value there. It still takes the attention and interest of the stakeholders for long enough to say, let me walk you through, let's just do this, because it's not the mechanics so much that we are worried about. It's that you follow me long enough that when we get to the end state and say, look, see how in 10 minutes we just revealed uncertainty where we haven't thought about there being uncertainty. So now we make the leap to what's the right discussion, what's the question we're trying to answer, what's the problem we're trying to solve. This is now me totally.
Yeah, and the uncertainty is what's used in estimating sort of the payoff structure of the problem, which is where they link together with what we were talking about before, which is trying to assess, how much gain do you expect if you make, in the best case or in the worst case, a decision, or gain or loss. And part of that is going to be around that uncertainty, right? You're going to multiply the payoff by the probability of the event happening. So those are the two components which are going to help you with your decision making.
I mean, I honestly think if we had like 5 minutes explaining asymmetric loss, going from the airplane example to your website example, and in 5 minutes would be a valuable way with many stakeholders, just to have them be like, oh, or type 1, type 2 errors, right? Go from the example of medical diagnosis to, the website, and say, hey, the test, given that, let's map it. And maybe that's one answer is
if you start there and give them the language that you guys have been using that they will get, and give them this, I think the airport example is perfect. Help them understand the different types of errors. And when we talk about confidence, we're talking about, increasing our confidence that we're not making those types of errors. And then we can talk about our comfort level with that that risk, and maybe we don't use the risk, maybe we use the term uncertainty, and that gets back to what you were saying earlier, Ellie, about them. Nobody wants to admit that there's still going to be uncertainty. If we stop calling it risk and call it, how much certainty are we willing to pay for, and we think of it that way. And that way, if I say that, hey, we've run the test long enough, or we're going to do this runtime calculator, and we've determined that we would need this much lift to get this much certainty in the time period that we have, and it would take this much longer if the lift were this much less to get that same level of certainty. And then everybody could start talking about everything as a lever instead of just the runtime and the lift. Let's talk about how much certainty we want to pay for. And, if we're talking about time is money, because it is, good point, Merritt. If time is money, and, there's opportunity cost, there's the cost of, the development, the design, everything that we're doing with tests, that has cost. So if we think of testing and our runtime calculations as literally calculating how much are we willing to pay for certainty and how much certainty do we need to make a decision, maybe it would change the conversation.
Yeah, but good luck, trying to start getting everyone to thinking about the marginal value of information, right?
Thanks, Matt.
It's hard. It's hard.
I want to take a go at getting at least the people on this call to think about the marginal value of information. I explained to Tim and Matt and Kelly earlier, I do a demonstration in class. So I bring in 2 cups, and in the cups are, there are dollars and just tokens that have no value. So there's dollar coins or tokens. And one of the cups has half of, 50% chance that you'll get $1. The other one only has a 25% chance that you'll get $1. And they have the same number of coins in them. And I call someone up to the front of the room and I say, if you give me $1, I'll let you pick one of the cups. And there's definitely more than $1 in each cup. So that's a good game. I want to play that game. When they get to the front of the room, I say, here's another game. You can draw several coins out of each of the cups, 2 coins out of each of the cups, see what they look like, and then throw them back in and then pick which cup you want to take home with dollars. So hopefully you can figure out which one has the higher conversion rate and pick the better one. And I actually contrived the example so that it's not worth $1 to look at 4 coins from the cups. And so I actually do this demo live with MBA students who really don't have a lot of analytics. They're not analytics people. They're going to be general managers. And this does seem to give them the idea of the marginal value of information, because it literally costs them an extra $1 to learn a little bit about the cups, but it's not a complete census of what's going on in the cups. And that's exactly what we're doing with testing. We're getting a little bit of information about what might be in the cups and then trying to decide which cup we're going to go with. And
we want to be able to pay the least amount to get the amount of information to make a better decision. And we don't overpay.
And not every experiment is worth it.
Yeah.
And some experiments are very worth it.
I was hoping you were going to pull out the cups and we were going to play.
The cups are in my office at school. I don't have any here. Sorry.
And your ice bound.
They're little red Pyrex dishes that I collect. So.
Well, awesome. We are at 2 minutes till. It's been a great conversation. I knew it would be. You guys are fun to talk to. It's easy to go down rabbit holes with all of you. So thank you so much for being here and for asking great questions and answering them in wonderful ways. I'm sure everybody on the phone, you may have additional questions, and I'm fairly confident that all 3 of our panelists would be happy to continue the conversation, TLC Slack or email. Please remember next call, March 23rd, we have 3 weeks in between instead of the normal 2. And our next conversation is tips and tips and tricks in optimization. It is a repeat conversation because I got a request for an encore. It was really popular last time. So please do try to make it. I really I really enjoyed everybody's questions and interaction this time, and thank you guys. And don't forget to send any questions or comments or recommendations for future topics. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, Ellie, and everybody on the Northeast area.